All right, go ahead, Kathleen.
Thank you so much, Erin, and thanks to all of you for being here this morning. Portland and South Portland do such incredible work, and so I know I'm speaking to the choir a little bit this morning, but I'm super excited about it. So let's get started. All right, is that showing up all right? Great. So I'm really excited to be with you all today to explore how we can all navigate and support climate legislation at all levels, because I'm going to suggest that that's really the key piece, or one of the key pieces, to climate action. So as Erin said in that lovely introduction, my name is Kathleen Meil. I'm the Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. The reason those two things go together is another presentation, and one of my absolute favorite things to talk about too. So we'll have to get back together to talk about the foundations of a strong democracy and how that helps us achieve our environmental and climate priorities. But in both cases, MCA does that work through education and collaboration and advocacy. And MCV is the organization that really focuses on influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections, which we are feeling pretty good about right now. One of my absolute favorite things that I get to do in this role is to convene and facilitate Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But first, I want to pose this question. What does climate action look like? This is a familiar scene. And for many of us, this is what climate action looks like, right? It looks like marches and rallies and school strikes and signs and petitions. It's big and it's visible and it's inspiring. This is how we really demand attention and demonstrate the power and the force of our convictions and the numbers that we have saying this is what we need to do. It's absolutely essential. It's not the only element of an effective movement. We also need the wonky, detail-oriented plans and the legal, regulatory, and administrative frameworks for implementing them. This is the part where I say, please don't tune out. It sounds less exciting, but it actually is one of the most exciting things that I've certainly ever had the chance to be a part of. And I suspect that you all are going to be either in the same boat or converts by the end of this hour together. So what does that look like? Well, there are a couple of really big pieces. Community action is the foundation for all of this work. And you all are really leading the way with the One Climate Future plan, with the Electrify Everything campaign, with all of the work that you're doing together to really change the way residents of Portland and South Portland experience not just the climate impacts, but the way you can take ownership of climate action. So you know that when you insulate your home or install window inserts, you are shaving off Maine's greenhouse gas emissions. You're also shaving your utility bills and getting a lot more comfortable in your homes. You're feeling that impact. It makes it easier for you to go out in the world and say to your friends, hey, have you thought about energy efficiency? Or to brag about your EV and how much less you're paying on gas these days than folks who are still driving traditional internal combustion engine vehicles. This is the day-to-day work of the climate movement. It's really easy to engage here. on a spectrum. I know it's not always easy, but you know the folks, right? You probably recognize the faces on this screen, and you probably run into each other at Hannaford and the library and the school pickup line and all the other places that you go. It's easy to join arms and be part of that grassroots bottom-up work. Super rewarding, but inherently limited, right? Portland and South Portland don't have big manufacturing plants that you can start producing EVs, domestic EV batteries, right? You don't have big power plants that you can fight to close down. Now, you've done a lot of really incredible big actions over the past, but we've got to look a little bit further to get to that global impact, which is what we're, of course, all thinking about when we talk about the climate movement. The other sort of end of that spectrum is federal action, right? That's where we see these big, bold international commitments and intersectional activities. In the last year, we have seen 2 absolutely record-breaking federal initiatives. The Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, which is often called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, includes billions of dollars in funding that are coming straight to Maine for clean energy transition, for energy efficiency, for roads and bridges, and clean energy infrastructure as well. Breathed a big sigh of relief when that passed through Congress, but we did not stop for a moment and worked for what I would say is the longest sprint of my life on the Inflation Reduction Act, which started its life as Build Back Better and went through more twists and turns than any of us really had the stomach for. But it was worth it in the end, because we ended up with $360 billion for energy security and climate action. Not every one of those dollars is going to flow to the state of Maine, but a shocking number of them will and already are. So this is really important work. It's also the work that other countries take notice of as well. So this is the place where we can really push for that big global impact. It's also really hard to figure out how to engage. My guess, looking at this screen, is that many of you have your federal delegation representatives in your speed dial or your favorites, and have let your congressmen and senators know how you want them to vote. After those emails and phone calls and petition signatures, what do? It's a little bit trickier, right? It feels further away. It feels like some of the decision makers are not people who want to take your phone calls all the time. So it's a little bit of a sticking point. But luckily, just like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we've got the state action right there in the middle, just right. This is the place that we see a response to the upswell of interest in climate action from the community level, and where we receive the funding from federal investments that let us really do that work at the state level. Maine Won't Wait is the climate action plan that was released just about 2 years ago. Coming up on December 1st, we will mark the 2nd anniversary of that plan. And I know the state has some big celebrations planned that will include progress reports, updates where we can really see and document how much work we've already done to implement that. What does implementation even look like? This is where we've got to really dig into the Maine legislature. So let's take a second and do a quick orientation. These numbers represent the results of last week's election. So you can see, in the Senate, we've got 35 state senators, and Democrats control that chamber with 22 seats. In the House, we have 151 state representatives, and again, Democrats control that chamber with 82 seats. With the re-election of Governor Janet Mills last week, Democrats also hold the governor's office. So that means we have what we call a legislative trifecta. And that's important for a number of reasons. including the composition of the Legislative Council. The Legislative Council is made up of 10 leaders. They're the leaders of each chamber. So Speaker of the House, Rachel Talbot Ross, homegrown lawmaker for all of you in Portland. And as of yesterday, the first Black Speaker of the House in Maine. Very cool. It's also the Senate President, Troy Jackson, who's returning to that position again. And then we've got the majority and minority leaders in each chamber. So the reason, because the Speaker and the Senate President are elected by the full legislature, they are usually the party, they always are from the party that controls the majority in those houses. And then these folks are the ones who are in charge of managing the entire legislature. They decide things like schedules, they decide things like approving or not requests for emergency legislation. And they also have the say over committee assignments. I told you we're getting into the weeds here, but this is really important. Committees are where the work of the legislature happens, where bills get introduced, where public hearings are held, where amendments are worked, and where all the initial votes are taken. There's really important work happening in all of these committees, but if you're thinking about environmental priorities and climate action, you're probably going to be most interested in what happens in the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, ENR. There can't be any field that loves an acronym the way the energy and climate community does. So you're going to hear a million of them. So ENR, the Energy Utilities and Technology Committee, or EUT, and the Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry Committee, ACF. You'll also see climate bills taken up by marine resources and transportation. And of course, appropriations is incredibly important because that's where all the budget decisions happen. Thanks for bearing with me through this orientation. It is important to know because who chairs each of these committees and who sits on these committees is really, really important to the kinds of conversations that happen there and the fate of the bills that get introduced. And it prepares you to wrap your mind around these three things. Every lawmaker, all 35 senators and 151 representatives, can introduce as many bills as they choose. Every bill gets a public hearing in committee. And every bill that gets any support in committee at all gets taken up by the full legislature. Take a minute to just let the mental math spin here. And you'll see why our legislators, our part-time legislators, will regularly consider 1,500, 2,000 bills in a legislative session. There are really, really important bills in that mix. There are complete non-starters in that mix, but all you know, if you are a lawmaker, is you're probably going to be called on to do something about every single one of them. Whew, that's a lot. That's a big ask. So when you see those folks in the Hannaford parking lot, say thank you because they are working hard. But we like to help them out. So this is where Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition comes in. The EPC has been around for almost 20 years. And it started with a very small group of environmental organizations and has grown to almost 40 organizations across the state. If you recognize any of these logos, you'll see that it's a pretty broad coalition. We have the state level offices of big national or even international organizations. We have Maine-based organizations that work on tons of issues across the whole state. We have super local organizations that focus very closely on one part of the state, one aspect of the state. But what we have in common is a commitment to pursuing those and advancing our environmental priorities in a couple of big areas. Land, water, and wildlife is a no-brainer, right? If you ask people, what does the environmental movement focus on? Land, water, and wildlife is going to be at the top of your list. But it's just one piece of the puzzle, right? Climate action is an increasingly big piece of the puzzle. Sustainable and healthy communities, equally important. If you are paying attention to PFAS and those forever chemicals, you know that how we take care of our communities is very much on the minds of our lawmakers. And then, of course, environmental justice is the other big category. So every year, representatives from all of these organizations come together at the beginning of the legislative session and go through those 2,000 bills and say, which are the top priorities? If you can only pick 5 or 8, what are you going to focus on? What do you, as a person who cares about climate action at the state level, what are you going to reach out to your lawmakers about? You've only got them for a few seconds in that Hannaford parking lot, and you're going to say thank you, and then you're going to say, and please vote this way on this bill. Which one do you talk about? Which one, if you're a lawmaker who's sitting with 2,000 bills in front of you, which one do you really dig into and pay attention to the legislative language, what your constituents think? How do you decide? We'll make it easy for you. We'll give you a short list. We are not quite ready to announce our priority agenda for the upcoming legislative session, but let's take a look at what we prioritized last year. So to protect Maine's environment, public health, and clean energy future in 2022, the EPC came together around this group of priority bills. And they're color-coded here by their success. So recognize tribal sovereignty. We've got a yellow color there because we didn't get it over the finish line, but we are not about to pause. So stay tuned for the next iteration of that effort. But together we were able to pass climate education legislation that will support Maine teachers and students to really understand what is happening in the world around us in our state and how we can engage in it. We successfully established a PFAS impacted farmers mitigation fund. For so long, Maine farmers were encouraged and supported by the state to spread what we now know was PFAS contaminated sludge. Many of them are unable to farm on their land because of that. And so we've got to help them out, not to mention the health impacts. We were able to successfully stop filling Maine landfills with out-of-state waste. There was a loophole that allowed waste that Massachusetts and other states said was too dangerous to landfill there to be trucked into Maine. No more. We upgraded water quality classifications for 800 miles of Maine rivers and streams. This was just an absolute shining moment in the last legislative session because, hold on to your hats, but this was passed unanimously. You don't hear that very often. Pretty big deal. We expanded the ecological reserve system. We were able to make some good progress towards adding environmental justice definitions and considerations to Maine state law. And to move along, there was a kind of tricky bill about the Kennebec River that we were able to sort of shift. And then the Pine Tree Amendment was also a big part of the work last year. And again, stay tuned. I would expect that to return. Okay, so the EPC will in the next month or so be identifying our top priorities for the 2023 legislative session. But how do you find out what those are going to be? Oh, I'm just going to skip right past that. One of the things that we do as a coalition is to put together fact sheets on every single one of those priority bills. This is I don't have time to read all the legislative language, and it's not particularly readable as it is, shortcut. It's a shortcut for you, and guess what? It's a shortcut for your lawmakers as well. You can always reach out to me or to any of the organizations that are part of the EPC for more information. And as the legislative session picks up, you'll get tons of updates and opportunities for action as we're working away at those bills. I am going to stop there and really invite your questions about how you can get involved and how you can make decisions about where to put your energies as you advocate for legislative priorities at the State House. I'm going to say one more thing though before I do, and that is one of the things I love about state action is the impact that you can have. Shelley Pingree, Susan Collins, Angus King, they get hundreds of messages, as well they should, right? We should all be contacting them. Jared Golden too, but I know he doesn't represent you if you live in Portland or South Portland. At the state level, if your state representative or state senator gets half a dozen messages about a bill, that's a lot. That means the bar is pretty low for us to make it very clear what we want them to do. And they work for us. So it's easy. You may run into them in town. You can email them directly, and it will make a difference because they're paying attention to who and how many people are reaching out. So that gives us lots of power, which is exactly as it should be. I want to make sure that we get to really have a good conversation here. So I'll stop talking and turn it back to Erin to lead and walk us through Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was really such a good presentation and a lot to take in. But yeah, we'll go ahead and start asking some questions. Bill, do you want to go ahead and ask your question first?
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Kathleen. I have an idea for a bill, and I can describe what the problem is, but not necessarily sure of what the solution should be. Where would I go with that?
I am so glad you asked, Bill, because I forgot a really important thing, which is to talk about when legislative requests need to be filed. So that magic date is called cloture. And what they usually do is they set cloture and say all lawmakers have to submit their bills to the Legislative Council. I think right now they're saying December 7th, which is swearing in day for the new legislature. It is never December 7th. They always extend it. It always ends up being somewhere in the 20s of December, so late December. And what you can do, some lawmakers will put in a bill that is fully formed at that point. And some will put in just a bill title. So it could be an act to solve the problem that Bill brought to my attention. You can reach out to your state legislator or to your state senator and say, I've got this problem and I really want to figure out a solution. You don't have to figure out what that solution is between now and cloture. You just can put in sort of a placeholder and say, we're going to figure this one out. Sometimes the best action is a study commission. You know, we're going to do some research. We're going to figure out how other states are handling this. We're going to talk to all of the stakeholders who are involved. Sometimes you don't need to do that because you can get to that idea pretty quickly, but maybe not before the end of December. So my advice is to just reach out directly to your state rep or state senator. If you have a good relationship with one of them, start there. If you don't, now's the time to start building one, and say, I've got this problem. I'd love to sit down and talk with you about it. This is a place where we have a tremendous amount of access, and lots of the bills that get submitted are direct constituent requests. And lawmakers love to do that because it's a great way that they can prove how responsive they are. So I hope that helps. And I hope we see an act to solve the problem that Bill brought to my attention.
Yeah, thank you. That's good.
All right, I see Caitlin's hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Hi. So thanks so much for all that info you were sharing. Couple questions, I guess. If you had, like, I know any kind of outreach is good, and it's really exciting to hear like how accessible our state reps are. Is there sort of a hierarchy of like biggest impact outreach? Like, I have to imagine form email, not so meaningful, but it just briefly, like, kind of what's the biggest I'm listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think you're right. Your instincts are right there, that getting a list of petition signatures is probably not as impactful as a direct conversation, but that doesn't mean it's not important, right? We want to see sort of those layers of conversation. If you have a strong, if you really have something to say, you should call or email directly. You could set up a meeting. Most lawmakers will be really open to that. Say, do you want to sit down for a cup of coffee? I'd love to talk this through. Or maybe that's not your style. The last thing you want to do is sit down for a cup of coffee with somebody. That's okay. You can give them a call. You can send them an email. The other really big thing, petition signatures, form emails, they matter. When Maine Conservation Voters sends out action alerts, we'll usually sort of populate the body of that email with some language already, but you can always edit it and say, hey, this is Caitlin, this is what I think, this is, share a personal story. That really makes an impact. And then we'll also keep you posted, and you can look for, with all the organizations you're involved in, about rallies or lobby days at the State House. We're in kind of a weird world. I probably can just leave it there, but I'll give a little more detail. Pre-pandemic, everything all of the work of the legislature happened in person in Augusta. So if you wanted to testify on a bill, for example, you'd have to find your way to Augusta, which, means you got a car and you're driving there, and you would have to sit in a committee room waiting for your turn. It could take you all day, and you probably have other things to do. And so that was a really high impact way to weigh in, offering in-person testimony, but not necessarily an accessible one. One of the silver linings of the last few years is that we've all gotten really good at this, right? We're having a really meaningful conversation, all from our own homes or offices, and we're not in the same place, and it works really well. And the legislature has figured that out too. So for the past couple of years, it has been possible to submit in-person testimony via Zoom. And that means you can be working away and have the little YouTube page up, and they'll bump, or the Zoom page, and they'll bump you into the waiting room when it's time and get you on screen, and then you can go about your day and you haven't had to drive anywhere. In-person testimony is always really, really, whether it's Zoom or actually in person, is really powerful. Written testimony is too. that is the piece that I did not pull together for you today, but I can find that and share it with Erin and Mia to distribute after this about some guidance for how to prepare your testimony. I know I always would get really nervous about it. And like, what if they ask me a million questions? They never ask you a million questions.
Yeah.
They do ask questions of like agency staff and,
Sure.
and advocates, but regular people, they're not going to ask you anything that you don't already know. And they're going to be really grateful that you've taken the time to.
Yeah, written. I've done written before, and it was very doable.
Yeah, fabulous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So if we're ordering them, it's probably testimony, in-person testimony, written testimony. That's to the committee, direct conversations with your lawmakers, and then, email and petitions below there. And lobby days is its own thing.
Got it.
Is showing up in force. It's that collective action piece that really does make a difference.
Cool. Yeah, a nice analogy I thought of for you were saying how accessible our folks are. Like, we watched part of a Portland Red Claws, or I guess Portland Celtics game last night, and it's like it's like this big, and there was like 30 people in the, well, I don't know, maybe 50 people in the stands. It was like, that's not like going to like a Boston Celtics game. So
Exactly.
Anyway, like thinking about that. Well, thank you.
Yeah, that was such a good question and a really good conversation too. I'll go ahead and ask Molly if you want to ask your question.
Sure. Hi. I am just starting to get involved with Third Act Maine, the new chapter of Bill McKibben's Third Act Central Group. And my two questions are, one, do you ever have need for people to kind of show up or testify or lobby or whatever that the seniors involved with Third Act Maine could help with? And the second question is your work really focused on the legislature, or are you also looking at climate action that involves like we're planning a bank action against the 4 major big banks in March? So is this really legislatively focused, or is there also thinking about what other action could help with climate impacts?
Really great questions, Molly. And I just wrote down Third Act Maine because I'm not, I don't know about it and I want to. So thank you. I love Bill McKibben and definitely want to learn more about that. Yes, absolutely. We would love to have your support and your energy coming in for lobbying, for testifying. The legislature, they're used to seeing me, right? They're used to seeing the lobbyists from lots of different organizations, and we have good, we have good or bad relationships depending on the person, and they trust us or don't trust us depending on the person. But that's a really important way to share a lot of information. It doesn't surprise them to see, when I testify in front of the Energy, Utilities and Technology Committee, they're like, yep, there's Kathleen. Okay, moving on. When Molly shows up, they're like, ooh, who's this? This is interesting. You're a real person. I like to think I'm a real person too, but not in this framing, right? So absolutely, it matters so much. And what we will do is, so MCV, through our social media and our email updates, we will send out lots of reminders, like here's when this bill is coming up. There's so many to keep track of. When I was working on these slides, I had a whole bunch of and here's how you use the bill search feature of the legislature. And I'm happy to walk through that with anybody, but it's complicated. You've got to know the LD number. It's not the most user-friendly in the world. And so I'm always happy to answer those questions and to just point you in the right direction and to let you know when a hearing is coming up, or when a floor debate is coming up, when it would be really important to get those those messages in and those communications into your legislators. I think your other question was about the grassroots action and the legislative action. The Environmental Priorities Coalition is really focused on the legislative action. And we use things like lobby days and rallies to demonstrate the numbers and the force of the support for those legislative actions. We really, really appreciate and see the value of all of the different ways that we each engage. And this is a really important note, I think. We don't all have to do the same work in the climate action movement. In fact, it's impossible, right? Because so many different kinds of work need to happen that for any one of us to do all of them it's just crazy. But it means that I can do the piece of the work that I'm best suited for, that feels the most rewarding and replenishing for me. And you can do the work that feels best for you. And we're piecing it together. We're stitching it all together. So I love this bank action that you're working on. I probably won't join you, but I know that we couldn't accomplish our shared goals without all of us doing our parts. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Jim, go ahead.
Oh, you're muted.
You're right, so I am. Good morning, everyone. Kathleen, great to see you, and excellent comments. In my personal life in Portland, I've certainly spent a lot of time working on sustainability issues, including on the council. But one thing I might add in my day job as a lawyer and a professional lobbyist who's been in front of the legislature for starting to push 30 years now, I hesitate to even throw that number out. One thing I would add, and it's something that I learned over many years, is just how busy state legislators are. My wife served for 2 years in the legislature. The number of emails, the number of contacts, the length of hearings that go on. So one of the things I would encourage is put yourself in the shoes of the legislators who are getting many, many contacts, who are sitting through days and days of hearings. And it turns out brevity is also really important. And I think legislators are partly doing a head count, which is how many people have clocked in, but chances are by the time the third or fourth person has spoken, maybe most of the issues have been said. So the best way to weigh in is to say, I agree with X person and just count me in as well. And you can sort of play it by ear, but don't feel like you have to go on and on or spend the full 3 minutes because at some point there's a diminishing return, and legislators will more remember the brief remarks than the long ones. So that would be my other advice to supplement Kathleen's very good advice.
Such a good point. And I love that reminder that our lawmakers are regular people, right? They've got other jobs, they've got other responsibilities. This is supposed to be a part-time, and it's definitely paid as a part-time job that eats up a lot of their lives for a lot of months every year. So starting with that, thank you for your service, and saying what you need to say and wrapping it up. They're going to hear from a lot of people, and they don't have to hear every point from each of us. I really appreciate that, Jim.
Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective that I also hadn't really thought too much about. So yeah, thank you for that note, Jim.
Kathleen, I have a question if no one else does.
Yeah.
About the Environmental Priorities Coalition and how you said as we include like climate action and just more topics beyond land, water, and wildlife. What is the process of an organization joining the coalition, and like who decides who can join a coalition? Is there any screening of like if someone truly has the environment in mind? Or could you just speak a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I love coalitions. They are messy and complicated and full of feelings and personalities in the best possible way. And there are a number of times that I think back to my days as a 5th grade teacher and think, oh my goodness, thank heavens I have this experience in my back pocket. Because it is, everybody's got their own sort of spin on what it means to advocate for the environment. So yes, we absolutely have a process where, we've got a clear set of priorities that we work on together. And we revisit those every once in a while and say, let's try to get really specific about what those priorities are and how we can show up for them. And then when an organization reaches out and says, hey, we're interested in joining, or if we see an organization out there in the world that we're like, wow, they're doing cool work. Let's see if they want to be part of the EPC. We'll reach out and actually start with that list of priorities and say, okay, which of these are reflected in your organization's mission? And then we also have a list of the sort of activities that we do together. Not to go into too much detail about that, but we meet on a monthly basis. We share updates. We share testimony. As Jim said, we don't have to all make the same point. So we might say, hey, here's what I'm going to say in that public hearing next week. It'd be super helpful if somebody else could make this point, because I can't do it all and I'm not the right person to speak to this. We bring really different perspectives, and so we'll often coordinate on that. The Maine Council of Churches and the Maine Unitarian Universalist State Action Network, MUSAN, are both really important members of the EPC, because they can speak to that moral imperative that so many of us feel in this work in a way that I feel that personally, but organizationally, that's not my case to make. We also have Maine Youth Action, speaks to a very different set of concerns and perspectives. And so to be able to say, whether you're a youth leader or a faith-based leader, we've got Gateway Community Services, and they've got a phenomenal new Color of Climate coalition that's really looking at supporting new Mainers and Mainers of color in sharing their climate action stories. So many of the new Mainers who are now part of our communities are living climate impacts or were living climate impacts in their home countries. And that's why they're here. We're going to see lots and lots more climate refugees in the coming years. And so being able to speak to that, it paints a much more complete picture of what we're facing and how we're facing it together. So yeah, we don't expect everybody to have the same lens. In fact, it wouldn't be useful if we did, right? We want to bring those different perspectives together. And there are organizations that belong to the EPC that have big staffs, right? The Natural Resources Council of Maine is probably the biggest environmental organization in the state. They can send a ton of members, and they do, to coalition meetings, and that's awesome. We also have teeny tiny shops that are run by one volunteer. The contributions, if you try to quantify the contributions, it's not going to be even, right? The number of hours that those two organizations spend are not going to be the same, but the impact is going to be equally important. And so we try to get to that in that conversation about whether it's a good fit or not is not like, can you put in enough time, but can you show up with your whole heart and your whole energy and share your resources and communicate out to your members, then it sounds like we're going to be a good fit. So if any of you are involved with organizations that aren't in the EPC, please reach out. We are always trying to grow our tent and think about all of the perspectives to make sure that we can, when we speak with one voice on those common priority bills each year. And by the way, we don't necessarily speak with one voice on the other, 2,000 bills because that would be a big lift. But on the things that we work together on, we want to make sure that we're representing Maine. And there's not just one version of who lives here, who cares about this place, and who's involved in this place. We need everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
Erin, this is Julie Rosenbach, and I would just like to add that a little bit about the city process, or at least the city of South Portland process, for advocating for bills, because oftentimes what happens is that people contact us and say, oh, you should go up and testify in favor of this or weigh in on this, but we can't do that on behalf of the city without city council support. So every year we send our city manager, he asks every department, do you have legislative priorities? And we send those to the city manager. Then they get put in front of council in time for cloture. And the city council says, yep, we absolutely want to go up and support this, or we agree with this, or maybe we have a little different take on this, or they might add their own. And that gives people the license to go up and advocate for the bills that we think are important to our departments. Of course, in One Climate Future, we have action items and advocacy items for things that need to change at the state level. So it's already built into there. But just wanted to let you guys know the city process.
Thank you, Julie. And you guys, I cannot say enough good things about Julie and the whole team in South Portland, about Julie, your counterpart, Troy Moon in Portland, and that whole office. You guys really are just incredible leaders and incredible connection points between the local level and the state level. It's been so wonderful to get to know you guys and to work with you. And I really appreciate the role that Portland and South Portland have both stepped into, to say, not every town in Maine has a sustainability office. Not every town in Maine has a sustainability officer or a staff at all, right? There are lots of small towns that aren't fully staffed, that don't have the capacity that you all have. And I know from working directly with Julie and with Troy that you carry a lot of weight for those towns and serve as a resource to them. So sometimes when I'm thinking about a bill that I think, gosh, this is really going to matter to town managers, I might reach out to Julie and say, hey, can you tap into your networks? Because when they get a message from me, they say, oh boy, somebody's asking for something. When they get a message from Julie and from Troy, they say, oh goodness, somebody's here to help. So I really appreciate that partnership and just thinking about all the ways that we fit together and move this work ahead together.
Bill, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. Just a shameless plug, and following up on Julie's point. If you're a Portland resident and you're worried about the climate and are also equally concerned about equity, this Monday, Councilor Zarro, who is the chair of the Sustainability Committee, is going to be submitting an amendment to add some dollars to our ARPA funding. And these dollars will be specifically targeted to the low income community. This is part of our Electrify Everything program. So again, if you're interested, that's 5 o'clock this coming Monday. If you want some more information, I guess you can ask Erin, and Erin, if you could send those, or Katie can send those people over to me, I can give you more background on it. Thank you.
Really, really great point. And I love the way you connected it to the federal investments that then flow directly to cities that you guys get to decide where they go and what you do with them. And that is really, really important. If you are thinking a lot about equity, which I hear you talking about, Bill, I also recommend checking out the Justice 40 initiative. So this was part of President Biden's commitment, starting, I think, actually on the campaign trail, to say that 40% of the benefits of these climate investments should flow to vulnerable communities. And what that means and how the numbers get crunched is talk about wonky detail-oriented processes for tracking, but the intent is just so powerful to think about who are the people and where are the communities that are bearing the brunt of the climate crisis, bearing the brunt of high energy costs that we know come from our over dependence on fossil fuels. But the blame game doesn't really help anybody who's trying to figure out how to pay their bills this winter. All of those pieces, to think about how we can match the level of service and of investment to the places and the people who need it the most. This is going to be a rough, it could be a rough winter with energy prices being what they'll be, and we know what our long-term strategy is for meeting those, and we need to meet those needs in a short-term way as well. So thanks, Bill. I really appreciate that.
I don't see any other hands raised. We still have a few minutes left if anybody does have anything else they want to add in there. I do want to take just a minute to say thank you so much, Kathleen, for joining us this morning. We went over so much information and it was just very, very helpful. And we will be posting this recording on our YouTube page, and then we'll send it out to everyone that attended and registered for this event, along with some links of things that were mentioned today. So we can just follow up with everyone that's attended and registered. So yeah, again, thank you so much, Kathleen. We really appreciate you joining us this morning. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a fabulous way to start my day. And I hope you all have a great day. And I hope that we get to connect again soon. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet y'all.
Bye.
Bye.